And hello, movie lovers, and welcome to the show. Today, I have a very special guest with me. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be interviewing him. He's actually a music composer, and that is none other than Kim Halliday. I can't wait to actually dive into his career and among other things that he's actually done. So let's go ahead, let's get into it. I'm excited to have Kim here, so let's do it. And hey, Kim, welcome to the show.
Hi, John. Thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
You're very welcome, and it's a pleasure to have you here. And I've done a lot of homework on you. I've actually discovered some of your composing. We're going to dive into a little bit of that in a little later, but tell people a little bit more about yourself and how you got into doing composing and what made you want to do composing and things like that.
Okay, so I was when I was 8 or 9 years old, I was part of an experiment in school, which basically, it was the 70s. We didn't know any better, and their thesis was, well, just let them run wild for maybe 3 months and see what happens, see if they learn anything at all. But they could choose what they learn, and of course, this was not a success. And so to follow up, they then had to recover this. So they brought in extra teachers to help us to catch up on this stuff that we just played away. And one of them was a music teacher who has changed my life. And I can remember him coming into the classroom with chimes and xylophones and things, and giving somebody everything to play and saying, "When I point at you, hit it." And we kind of made music, and I was taken by that. And then any child that showed any kind of interest in it, he sort of helped to improve. And so he gave me the xylophone and taught me to play the xylophone. And then somebody offered violin lessons, and he said, "Oh, you should learn to play the violin." But he was such a nice guy, because you have to remember, this was a long time ago. Teachers weren't, they were a lot more Trunchbull than Miss Honey, if you want the Matilda reference. And he took the headmaster of the school into letting us use the public address system as a radio station on Friday afternoons. And I went in, and he said, "You can play whatever you want. Play a record. Have you bought any records?" And I just started buying 7-inch vinyl singles. And I said, "Yes, I have. I've bought this one. It's called Back Off Boogaloo. It's by Ringo Starr." And he said to me, "What are you going to say then? You need to introduce it. What will you say?" And I said, I read the label. I said, "It's called Back Off Boogaloo. It's by Ringo Starr, and it was written by Richard Starkey." And I can remember him saying to me, "Richard Starkey is actually Ringo Starr, and that's just his stage name is Ringo Starr. His real name is Richard Starkey." So he wrote it and played it, but it wasn't a kind of, "Oh, you stupid kid." It was sort of, you need to understand how these things work. And so that's my kind of recollection of him. So he changed my life, because then I was hooked. And
That's
then,
awesome, though.
yeah, it's a great teacher. And then I can remember School's Out by Alice Cooper coming on the TV in my house, and my parents were there and my grandparents were there, and I've got 3 brothers and they were there. We were watching. There was a famous English pop show called Top of the Pops, which was on every week for years and years. And up comes Alice Cooper in full regalia, with the eye makeup and the sword, and starts singing School's Out. And honestly, you would have thought the world had ended. It was the end of civilization as we know it. And my parents and my grandparents agreed for the first time in my living memory. And I can remember thinking, "Oh no, I want to do that. I really want to do that. I want to be that." So it was a bit of an act of rebellion. And to meet girls, and both of those things worked.
Of course.
annoyed my parents, and I got to meet girls, so that's where I was. And then I was in bands. I was, the punk thing happened here in the UK, and I was in bands with 3 people I hated for a long time. A revolving 3 people that I hated for a long time. And it got to my kind of late 20s, and I thought, "Oh, this is ridiculous. This is not I can't be a grown up and be this, bloke moaning in the back of a van." And so I went to the London International Film School to learn to write to picture, because I kind of looked at it and went, "That would be good. I don't see myself as a pop star. I never did. But I could write music to picture." And I'd always written songs and things. So I went to the London Film School and learned to write to picture. Just as everybody started using sync music, really, is what it comes to. So my timing, as ever, was pretty ropey. But then I've just been, doing documentaries and films and theatre and anything really, just writing music. But I think the thing that I've sort of realised as I've got older is that there's music in my head the whole time, and sometimes I write it down. and sometimes it's other people's music, and I write it down thinking it's mine. But there's a tune in my head nearly all the time, and I just assumed everybody was like that, but obviously it's not true.
But you see, though, I think that's actually fantastic to be able to have music in your head. And even if it's somebody else's, you can always wind up having this thing where, well, maybe I can expand on something that's different that I can tell as a storyteller through my music, through somebody else's music, through, and maybe you can actually do it through your lenses. And
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
some people get something out of it, though, too.
I think as I've got more experience, you realise that whatever you do, it sounds like you. You know,
Right.
and I'm please don't think I'm comparing myself in any way, but if you think about Stevie Wonder songs, doesn't matter who's singing them or playing them, you know they're Stevie Wonder songs
Exactly.
because this this is the level I don't even aspire to because it would be ridiculous to aspire to something so beautiful. But there he has a voice and there is a voice. John Williams, Hans Zimmer, Bernard Herrmann, who's my film composer hero. You know it's them, for good or for bad. It's Ed Sheeran and Taylor Swift as well. There's a voice. They have a voice, and that's important, I think. And I don't even if you're unconsciously being influenced by things, which you are, you can't help it. Your voice will come through that, and I think that's okay.
I think so too. I think that's fantastic. And you know what? I also like a little bit of Alice Cooper though too. But and my parents also thought that I was insane for even liking Alice Cooper. And then also too, I remember I got a guitar, thinking that that's what I wanted to be and everything. And then I'm like, well, I also like movies. I also like that kind of stuff too. So I think I'm gonna stick to what I know versus it being like over the top. And then of course you mentioned the age thing too. Is like, am I really gonna look good at the age of Alice Cooper or Ozzy for that matter and do what they do? I'm like, no. I
I
have to
mean, I
look
think
at the reality.
I think I'm probably better looking than Ozzy at his age, but not Alice. Definitely not Alice.
No.
But it's about an act of rebellion as well, isn't it? It's about that kind of teenage rebellion. And
Right.
I've never really, I've never really achieved that level of rebellion. But it's kind of, it's good to be sort of kind of, well, actually, why don't I challenge some of this stuff? Why do you have to be like that and do that? But me and 50 million other teenagers, no doubt.
Exactly.
I
So
think
my
the other
thing
thing about sorry, if I could just say about the other thing about the early 70s, which is when I was when I was becoming a teenager, there weren't that many other things to do. There was a very short list of things we might do with their time. Listen to the radio, watch one of two channels on television, play football in the street. There wasn't. It's not like today when there's so many other things that teenagers could be doing and enjoying.
Exactly. And that's also how I am though too. I came from a small town and I lived in the 90s. I was born in the 80s.
Mm.
But even then, that we were only confined to like a small amount of channels and stuff like that. You either get like maybe 3 channels at that time. So and that's it. And then of course I was like, okay, well, what am I gonna do? There's nothing else to do out here. So there's music, there's TV, and that's pretty much it. And there's movies. So
Yeah,
I was
so
the movie
movies,
guy.
good. Yeah,
So,
good.
but
Because movies are cool.
yes, most definitely. And speaking of movies, man, like I have to say though, I do definitely like the fact that you're so unique when it comes down to your own way of composing, and I can tell there's a little bit of Hans Zimmer in you and a little bit of John Williams as well. There's like a little bit where basically I feel like they're in the background and you're in the forefront and you're on
Mm.
stage. I can picture this, and I didn't say this when we were in the green room, but I picture you're out in the forefront and you're doing your composing and they're in the background. And
I don't
yeah,
think you can be a film composer because of the way the music comes around. So if I was writing a song for fun, or I was in a band and we were doing new material, that song would be driven by perhaps a lyric, or I'd just be writing a tune and then somebody else would be writing a lyric, or all these different ways. But it's my creative uh, impetus, my creative start. With a film, it's a collaboration, and the film director or the person who's in charge of the music, which most often in my experience has been the film director, which is the way I like it, has something in their head. Now, that's one of my role is to write music for films, but the second line of that is to discuss and to agree with the director what they want, what they saw the film was going to be, how they heard the film in their head. Now, I can argue with them and do, trust me, about what that is. But actually, my job is to deliver to them something that pushes the artistic arc of whatever they're doing forward. Now, that can be in a short, it can be in a documentary. It doesn't matter what the format is. The director will have an idea about why they're telling this story in the way they're telling it. And so, a lot of people come to me and say, "Well, it's like I want it to be like this or that, or some other piece of music." In higher budget productions and higher budget projects, that'll be a music editor will have put some music on so that the editors can write the film and it can edit the film into in an even way, so it's timed. So there's a piece of music, and then they can time the cuts to the music, and that's all good. And a lot of times I've been given films with music on them that they can't clear, or they don't fancy paying Hans Zimmer for reusing one of his scores. And so
Right.
you do have to make it sound a bit like that. At the extreme end, if I were lucky enough to be given a Bond film, at some point in the Bond film, I'm going to have to go bum ba da bum 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 ba da bum bum, or just you're not doing your job because everyone expects that. So
Right.
I
Exactly.
think the same is true when film directors when film auteurs are steering you in some project, they will be steering you towards something. And I'm not, I have the deepest of respect for Hans Zimmer and John Williams and their careers. I don't really want to write music that's the same as that because
Right.
they already do it. There's already one in the world, and one's enough. But you can't help but be influenced by them because you watch, you see their films all the time. The score for Jaws, really. What are you going
Agreed.
to say?
And Jaws is
Or
hands down one of my
Vertigo.
favorite films because of that score.
Mm,
So yeah.
mm. And I make jokes about Hans Zimmer. The lamb can laugh at a lion, but the Blade Runner 2049, he did a fantastic job in such a short time in such awful circumstances. And I went to the I loved Vangelis' score for the original Blade Runner. It's one of my favourite scores. And I went to the cinema knowing I was going to hate Hans Zimmer's score, and actually he'd done such an amazing job of it. And I don't want to spoiler, but the last scene in the film is just so good, and I was so happy and so pleased that he'd done that, because he was faithful to my expectation, that it was going to sound a bit like the Vangelis thing. Obviously, the instrumentation and the orchestration were different, but he captured the spirit of Vangelis. And with all the troubles that they had with the music in that film, that was a really good job. So
It was the
I
only one
think
that stood out, basically.
I think he does. They do great work. It's Hollywood and orchestras and teams of people. I'm a lot more solitary than that. That part of the reason that my music sounds the way it does is because I kind of do as much of it as I possibly can.
That's what I'm talking
Control freak. Control freak.
Nah, I think it's good to have some control and some balance. To be honest with you, to where you can have that creativity, but also follow what the director wants and allow you to have that
have to do that.
balance. Right.
Yeah, and I think that's the secret to being successful with it. Is it's no good. Who knows? I don't know. Not every director that I've ever worked with has come back to me and said, "Thanks, Kim. I'm really pleased with that." But I think you just look at it and go, "Well, that's what it's about. It's a collaboration, and you have to move towards that collaborative effort." And of course, that's a great liberator, because it's not my fault if the film's not a success. It's the director's fault. So nobody comes out of the film and says that was a masterpiece spoilt by the music. At least they've never said it to me.
See, I go by a couple of things though too whenever I'm reviewing a film. I'll go by the music, and also because here's the thing, I think the music plays a bigger part in the movie too, just as much as the actor does, even though the actor is acting and having his dialogue. And I think the dialogue can pull you out, but I also think if the music is not composed in a certain way, edited into a certain way, that can also take you out too, because it actually feels like a different movie, and therefore it loses identity of what that movie is.
Yes.
And that's how I felt with watching Magnificent, which is that James Wan film. I'm like, what the heck is going on here? It turns into this, and then you have this wacky music going on. I'm like,
I think that
it was like kind of off balance a little bit when I was watching that.
Yeah, when I was at the film school, Michael Kamen, who was the composer that wrote Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, came in and was talking to us, and I was lucky enough to have a conversation with him because I was the music guy, the music student, and he said, you have to think of it as another actor. So if you're scoring a scene and an actor's being very busy, you need to keep out the way of that. Whereas if and somebody's being a bit dull, then you probably have to do more. So he said, for example, on Prince of Thieves, whenever Alan Rickman was on the screen, I did almost nothing because he was so over the top. You know, he was doing that kind of camp Sheriff of Nottingham, which he did brilliantly. And I said, oh, yeah, okay. And what about Kevin Costner? And he said, well, then I had to earn some money. You know, you've got to kind of do more because the Kevin Costner character, partly by the nature of Kevin Costner, but also by the nature of the way the film was structured, was a much more straightforward, you know, even person. So you need more music. So I agree with you. The music is as important as the actors. I think increasingly in those Hollywood productions, you know, the music is less of an afterthought than it used to be, which is good. And I think they're more flexible about using sounds like, you know, for example, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross are using in The Social Network and Gone Girl and those films. And so that opens it up to me. And there's some people in the UK that I really, Ben Salisbury and Jeff Barrow, who scored Ex Machina and Annihilation. You know, they do great work without an orchestra, with using synthesizers and things. So I think the possibilities are opening up for us, and it's a really interesting time for film music.
I think so too. And now my other thing is too, is it challenging to do a short film like the Tiny Mad Animals, or is it more challenging to do a longer film? Because I think that it would be more challenging to do a short film because you have a 30-minute movie or a 10 or a 5-minute movie, and you're having to compose something that represents these characters and the drama that's behind those characters, or the comedy for that matter, and you're trying to figure out a balance. Is that a tough thing to do whenever it comes down to short films?
You're right, it is, because you've got to hook, you've got to get the hook in, you've got to get people understanding what bits of the score mean what. But there's films, because there are less layers in a shorter, well, it's a sweeping generalization, but you know, there tend to be less layers in a short film. There's a shorter character arc. The real thing about the difference for me is that it's much harder in a short film to get your voice across. So to write enough music so people go, oh, this is Kim, in my ambition to be Stevie Wonder. Whereas in a longer film, you do get more time to develop it. So, for example, in Tiny Mad Animals, that was an interesting thing because originally the director who I've worked with several times wanted to use a song by an act called Philly Cale, who I don't know the man, so I don't know. And we couldn't clear it. We tried to clear it, but we couldn't get clearance. So I wrote a song, and then the song got bent into the score. We were using lots of echo and stuff. And I was really pleased with that one because of the way it came around, because it was all basically based on that song that I'd written, and also because we managed to get that the music all the way through that, you know, the layers of the film, which was really cool. Whereas with I Am Gen Z, which is a documentary I did a couple of years ago, you know, there were 7 scenes in the film which were basically just to pause because the rest of the film was quite frantic, and I got to adapt a piece of music and develop it and make it more and more dystopic as we got along. So that was a lot of fun. So if you've got more time, you get more time to do those kind of things, which make it more interesting, I think, from a creative point of view, but also from a listener's point of view as well.
Most definitely, because I think, like I said, if you add that tension with those characters, the music becomes that character, and
Mm,
therefore you can care about the movie or the character even that much more.
yeah.
And I think that what you're doing is you're adding your own little signature to it, to where it's like, oh, this is a Kim Holiday composing, and
Mm.
therefore everybody's like, oh, okay, yeah, I heard of you, so therefore I want to try and work with you even more. So I think that you might actually have a little bit of key signatures within your own music to where people can actually represent who you are, though, too.
Yeah, I hope that, but not at the expense of the project. You know, I don't want
Right.
people to go, "Oh, I'm going to see this because it's got Kim's music in it." I mean, that would be great. I don't think it's very
But
likely, if I'm honest.
no, because most people are like, oh, okay, so there's a new there's actually a new Arnold movie, or there's a new James Wan movie. They're going for either the James Wan or the actor that's in it, even though the actor doesn't really serve the movies as much
No,
anymore.
that's
But
right.
yeah,
I think I've accepted at this late stage in my life that most people in the world are not quite as obsessive about film music as I am. The first thing that whenever anyone says, "Have you seen such and such a film?" I give them a commentary about the music, which is a bit wearing for them, I'm sure. But so I personally, there are some composers who I go, "Well, I'm going to watch that because the music's by insert somebody here."
right.
Whereas I don't think the average customer does.
No, only
Yes.
only movie nerds like me or someone that follows a lot of movie media will actually say, you know what, that's a
Yeah.
Kim Halliday. Who's that? Don't worry about it.
Could you
The
imagine?
might tell you it comes up, forget about it. You know?
That's a conversation you're never going to hear. A producer on the phone to another producer. Yeah, I got Arnie and Tom Cruise and Beyonce, but we really need to get Kim. Not going to happen.
Who's Kim? Don't worry about it. We just need him, okay? Just
That Korean guy, we don't need him.
No, get that Kim guy. Go on ahead, get him in there with the last Mission Impossible movie. We don't know who he is. Okay, well, what's somebody else that's doing it.
What's the project? It's Fast and Furious 407. Oh, right, get Kim in.
But I want to talk about this though. Okay, so I listened to your Babylon album, and my question was this: what was the idea behind Babylon and your inspiration behind Babylon?
I had a conversation with a friend of mine, Bernadette Barrett, and we were chatting about how good it was when we were 11 years old, and a band would release a single, and that would be the end of it. And then 6 weeks later, they might release another single if that one was a hit. And the way she described it was single, tumbleweed, single, tumbleweed, single. And I kind of went, oh, well, I need to do that. I need to see if that works in the modern age. So never mind wait for me to get an album. Why don't I just get 3 pieces of music and release them as singles? Single, tumbleweed, single, tumbleweed. So I went away to think about that. I have always been interested in that ancient history. So the kind of pre-Christian history, really 4,000 years ago, 2,000 years BC. Because when I was young, I read a book about the Battle at Marathon in 200 BC or whenever it was. And so I'm interested in that. But as I've got older, I've read more, and I was involved in a project about a Neolithic monument here in the UK called Stonehenge, which I got really interested in the kind of why and what for. And so I kind of went, oh, well, I know what I'll do. I'll do something about the gardens at Babylon, which are one of the ancient wonders of the world. So it was going to be something peaceful and ambient, and that was the original plan. 3 lovely, beautiful pieces, and off we go. And then I had some more ideas as it went along, like you do, and I ended up with 6 pieces, and I had stories for them, because obviously one of them is about 2 of them are about the Hanging Gardens of Babylon and whether they existed or not. And then I'm quite interested in the way that these stories have developed over thousands of years. So almost every religion has a flood story, a creation story, something that's like hell or purgatory, something that's like heaven that you go to if you're good. And all these ideas have been changed and slightly developed over thousands of years, and that's a good thing. So there is evidence of floods in China in 400 BC, for example. But I mean, obviously the plains in the Holy Land were flooded every year, I'm sure. And I'm interested in the way in which those stories developed, and the way in which people now take them so literally, when obviously it's just, some of it is just an explanation for things that people didn't understand. So I started doing a thing about the flood and the Tower of Babel story, which I find amusing.
Tower of Babel is actually one of my favorites, to be honest.
Thank you. The story is that God and the angels were concerned that people were getting along too well and building a tower that might reach heaven, and came down. I'm summarizing, and I'm sure theologians will be on my doorstep by the time I finish speaking. And came down and gave everybody different languages so that would stop. And I mean, you kind of go, well, communication between us would be so much improved if we all understood one another. So anyway, and then the last piece, which is called Heaven, was about a conversation I had with my granddaughter, which at the end of all this I remembered when she was 6, and she was asking me about heaven and whether everything that died went to heaven. And I said, I don't. She knows I don't know. I'm kind of agnostic, So I said, I don't really know. And she said, well, everything that's died has gone to heaven. And I said, well, yes, that's what people believe, and if it makes them feel more comfortable about it, then that's absolutely fine. She said, so dinosaurs. And I kind of went, oh Lord.
And I wanted a deep cut.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to laugh, but not at her, just because the little process in her mind was so lovely. And so I did it. I stopped myself from laughing. I said, I don't know, darling. She said, well, there must be sections. It's like this kind of little logical mind. And so when I thought about that, that made the last piece, and that kind of tied it in a bow. And then I played it to my children, my grown-up children, and one of my daughters, who's always honest with me, said, "Does everybody want to hear these stories, Dad?" And I kind of went, "Well, no, I am writing film music." So I took all of them and did an instrumental version. And then one of the things that I do as a film composer is people hear pieces of work that I've sent them, from earlier releases or earlier projects. And they say, "Oh yeah, can you do something like that? But it needs to be a bit slower and a bit, change it, have an electric guitar, but who knows?" And so one of the things that I do is I adapt pieces all the time for people, or make them longer or shorter, and then they cut the film a bit different, I twist them. So that's one of the things that I do. And I kind of went, well, I should do that too, to all these pieces. So we ended up, instead of having 3, we ended up with 18 pieces of music, I'm afraid. But I was putting them out in sets of 3, and anyway, you can get them on Bandcamp for nothing. So it's not like I'm making people pay too much money. So it's one of those things where it sort of grew a bit out of hand. But I was pleased that I managed to deliver it in the way I did. And then I did the single tumbleweed single thing. It didn't really work. It didn't really make any difference to the number of people that listened to it. So a good lesson learned. But that was how it began.
But yeah, I listened to Heaven, and I was thinking to myself while listening to it, this is basically, even if some people do believe in that, and it gives them a little bit of silliness, I believe that is a conversation between them and God. That was the symbolism of the music that I got from that, which I thought was very uplifting and very peaceful.
It was meant to be uplifting. It was designed to be uplifting and peaceful, because that was the initial thing.
The intent,
there are other parts of that project which are not uplifting and peaceful, but the intent was for it to be uplifting and peaceful. And we don't know. I will one day find out. And if I was wrong in my thinking all through my life, I won't be there for very long before I get sent to the other place. So I think it's, but I think it's an interesting. I just think it's an interesting. It's interesting to look at these things from the eyes of children. Always,
I think so too.
Because it's very simplistic, but actually, I think religion could benefit from being a little bit less ornate and perhaps a bit more simplistic. Just because I think it would be nice to believe that, wouldn't it? It would be such a comfort to know that you're going to meet everybody someday.
It is very comforting, because there's people that we want to meet up in heaven. I'm sure it's people that we lost, and have that comfortness of, oh, I get to see one of my friends I haven't seen since high school that might have died at an early age, or
absolutely.
Someone
So if that makes you
XYZ, yeah. But yeah, I like the simplicity of looking it through the eyes of an innocence of a child, because of the fact they have this huge expansion of the imagination. And I like how she hit you with the dinosaurs. It goes from yep. I definitely love that.
I mean, one of the things that I do now is I'm my grandson, who's now 7, is at school, so he's in the 3rd year of infant school, it's called in the UK. And because they were locked down, I started going into them, because they couldn't sing together. They'd never sung in a group. And so I started going into the school and teaching, not teaching, but singing with the kids and doing music with the kids. And I do it every week now on a Friday afternoon, which, can I just say, thank you very much to the teachers for giving me that they're all exhausted moment in the week. But anyway, and it's just so rewarding, because there is always, every week, absolutely at least once, sometimes 2, 3, 4 times, they ask me a question, and I am just floored by it. And just you like, I don't know. And they go off in such different directions, but it's just lovely with children, and they are very lovely, and they're polite, and they're nice to me. But it just, every week there's somebody asks me a question that I have absolutely no idea how to begin to answer.
But you see, though, I think that's a good thing that you are honest with them, because I'm like, well, okay, well, maybe if he doesn't know about this, I can go ahead and ask him about another question and stuff like that. So I think that's actually, you're being honest and upfront with them right away, to where it's like, okay, well, maybe I can establish a friendship with him if I ask him another question on top of the question that he doesn't know. So maybe he might know it. So yeah.
You could watch this discomfort rippling around the room as they all start asking me questions about things. I'm, whoa.
I can see the sweat coming off your head whenever that happens.
I do try to tell them the truth. There are some subjects which I do keep well away from, as you can imagine. But it's just, why do people swear in records? That was why do people use bad language in records? I'm kind of like, well, mainly because they can't think of better words to use, I think. When of course the answer is they want to shock you.
Exactly. They want to shock you. They want you to feel the intensity of what they're feeling, and the only way
Yeah.
to express it is through that. So yeah,
I just don't think the 7-year-olds are ready for Snoop Dogg yet.
no, I don't think so either. That was not on my playlist as a kid.
Well,
At
the
age
problem
7.
the problem is I play them things from my phone, and I have to be very, 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 very careful.
I do too, man, because I got some Eminem in there. I got a little bit of
Absolutely.
Disturbed. I got a little bit of everything. So yeah.
Yeah, you do. Yeah. And they do ask me, sometimes they say things like, well, can you play something? One of them wanted me to play We Will Rock You by Queen. I said, it's just not on my phone. It's like, get it on YouTube, granddad, you know. But again, you do need to be careful.
Right, exactly. But okay, so my other thing was this. I know that you got some awards for the some independent horror movies. Now, is horror movies your go-to, or doesn't matter what genre it is?
No,
Which
I
one's
don't care
easier?
I don't care about genre. I care about, is it going to be fun, and is it a good film? You know, it's almost impossible. My ideal situation is that I get sent a script before they've shot it, and I start thinking about it then to give us all time to do that. And in those circumstances, obviously, you don't know what it's going to look like or who's going to be in it. So I think you just have to look at it and go, do I like these people? Do they like me? You know, it's not really a genre thing. I think the other thing is, of course, nobody's likely to come to me and say, can you do a rom-com? It's not really kind of what I do. So it's sort of self-leveling. But the music in horror films is just so much fun to do, because it just changes it. I mean, imagine, as we were saying earlier, imagine Jaws, and the shark is coming for the girl, and the music's going. It's not going to work. It's not going to be the same. But you know, there's a story actually. I read a story when Jaws, I think it was the 25th anniversary, that Spielberg went over to John Williams' house to hear some of his thoughts on the music. And John Williams said, well, this is the theme for the shark. And it's not as simple as it's
Right.
more than that. And apparently Spielberg went, well, that's not going to work.
I remember that.
And it's the two most famous notes in after the two together in Psycho in the shower scene, the two notes of film music that everybody knows. So I think that's the joy of horror films, is that you can make it, you know, so people jump, and that's what we want.
Right.
There was a thing I saw with the guy who was Alfred Hitchcock's second unit director, something like that, and he was talking about how they made it tense, and he said, you know, the way it's lit, the way that you can shorten and vignette the room, the way the sound is, what the characters are doing, making it darker, the music, and then just before it all happens, you just pause and do nothing at all, and everybody goes, and then bang, you've got them. And I think that's the truth, and that's what happens. That's what's happened with music in horror films that I've done. You build it up and you build it up and you build it up. It's just tension and release, tension and release,
Exactly.
tension and release. But it is such fun. And you know, it doesn't need to be horror film for that. Dance music, you know, club music, EDM is the same. You just have that kind of filter going. You can keep that for 15 minutes. When you finally drop, everybody's going to go mental. It's great.
I definitely agree with you. And like you said before we actually started, less is always more. So just because you have like maybe 2 notes or maybe 1 note, you're adding tension without even knowing that you're adding tension. You're actually releasing without knowing that you're releasing at the same time.
Exactly right. And you know, my sort of composition process is that I will, if we were talking about a film, a scene in the film, I will look at the scene, work out what the tempo is, work out where it, you know, if their hero's going to go bump, then the music needs to go bump, that stuff. And then I will start writing, and I will write with drums or with guitars or with pianos. Who knows? It's all possible for me, and that's all lovely. Often it starts with a rhythm, and I start building up a rhythm, because that obviously that allows you to see where the pulses are in the edit. And you know, less is more. So I almost always end up with a lot of tracks of recordings that I then start going, right, we don't need that, we don't need that, we don't need that, we don't need that. You know, is this adding anything? Is that adding anything? Recently I went down to, I've been working on a project which isn't out yet, but is a kind of sci-fi horror radio play, I guess. There's no visual to it. It's just stories a friend of mine has written, and I've written music that sounds. It's a bit like Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds meets Stranger Things. That's where we're aiming.
Oh, nice. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. Okay.
Well, and I went down to studios down in Bristol on the other side of the UK, and they've got lots of old synthesizers. So I sampled lots of them, and mucked about, and then I went back down there and did some work on the masters with with Stuart Matthews, who's the engineer there, and he was rolling off EQ and taking out bass and taking out treble, and it makes it all sound clearer. So absolutely less is more. So a lot of the things, I've just done another thing for a pitch video for another film, which is basically just, it started off being quite complicated. It's basically just an echoey guitar and me playing drums. And I'm not a good drummer, so it's a simple drum pattern. And it fits the piece. So I do think it's very possible now with the technology to have, I can have any number of strings and any number of horns and any number of clarinets and all that stuff. But actually what you do then is you just kind of, you're in danger of making soup,
Exactly.
And so I try to strip it back. I almost always strip things out, and then I try to strip it back even more and see if you just need to capture the essence of it, don't you? Is what we're after. Is what do I want here? Is I want something which brings out an emotion, and okay, in some circumstances, something triumphal and orchestral, and the Indiana Jones theme is going to absolutely make everybody go, yes.
Right.
But a lot of the time, I don't want to do that. I want people to go, oh no, that's terrible. And so that requires one echoey guitar.
So my question is this: would you rather with technology changing the way music is changing, do you go back to the old school way of doing things? Which one do you like better? Do you like doing the new way or the old way, or do you like blending both?
I blend both because I think if you just use the new way, if you just use the old way, why would you do that to yourself? It just makes it hard, honestly. I can get it all down on tape. I've got tape in my studio, but it's just, it's just hard.
And time consuming too, I bet.
Sorry?
And time consuming a little bit too.
Well, yeah. And also, I've got a lot of software, so I can have all kinds of EQ, all kinds of reverb, all kinds of processes, and you can't do that. If I want to do a tape loop, I record a piece digitally and I loop it, and it goes click, click, click. If I wanted to do a real tape loop, I have to go and get sellotape, cut the tape. I always cut the tape in the wrong place. I then have to go and record it again because I've cut the tape in the wrong place. I don't want to, it's just long. So I like the idea that you can have these things. You can use those old-fashioned processes, and I often use software processes and just set them off at random and let it run and see what happens. And that's always good fun, and that works either way. If you go entirely digital, you are in danger of becoming a little bit mechanical, and it's very easy to fall into habits. It's certainly easy for me to fall into habits where you just repeat the same thing over again. So, there's a guitar here. I've tuned it to D. I pick it up. I play You Are My Sunshine in a kind of ragtime style every time I pick it up. And that's what happens with computers. You get into it, you kind of go, right, so it loads up at 120 BPM. So let's start something at 120. It's easy to become formulaic, and I don't want to become formulaic. And I'm sure people who listen to my music will disagree, but it is my intention to be different and interesting and windswept as much as I can be.
Definitely, and I can definitely see that through your music. And my thing was this: whenever I heard this quote where people were talking about your style, and I wanted to know what you thought of this, but they described it as Sonic Youth meets Bernard Herrmann and face bashing all-out guitar assault. So that's something that I wrote down because I'm like, that's very interesting. So I wanted to know your take on it, on what you thought of that, because you said that about the punk rock era. So,
I did, yeah, absolutely.
So that's what I wanted to catch.
I genuinely, that the Sonic Youth thing sort of passed me by. I had small children and I was at the film school, and so I didn't really get into that grunge thing until afterwards. So I don't think I was influenced by Sonic Youth, but I think I was probably influenced by some of the people that influenced Sonic Youth, if you see what I mean. The fact that somebody said I was anything like Sonic Youth and Bernard Herrmann was an absolute joy to me. I was really happy with that, because normally, I'm grumpy about this stuff, and if somebody says, "Oh, that sounds like," I'll go into a 6,000 word essay about why it doesn't. But of course, perception is people's perception is people's perception. I can do nothing about it. So yes, I was really pleased with that. And then the all-out face-bashing guitar assault, I was quite pleased with that as well. But that was to do with my friend Martin, who we spoke about earlier. So Martin Lister and I worked together on an album called Half Light, and he was involved with a German band called Alphaville. He was their musical director, who had a hit with Forever Young in Europe, which Jay-Z sampled, and they also had a hit earlier than that called Big in Japan, which was a kind of new wave, new romantic kind of hit. But he was in Berlin and I was in London, although I met him in London. I was my friend in London before. And I used to send him, I said to him, let's do an album together. And he was kind of like, yeah, okay, might as well. He wasn't busy doing something else. And so I started sending him tracks and he would produce them for me and add to them and give them back. So I had this piece called, for example, called Seven Deaths, which I'd written words for, which were 7 different ways to die. I don't know where that came from. I was sat in a restaurant one night and the idea came to me. And I'd made this piece, which was sort of okay. I was pleased with it, but it really wasn't. It wasn't finished. But there were quite a lot of guitar tracks on it because I couldn't make up my mind what I wanted. And I sent it to Martin, and he sent it back. And honestly, if you want to listen to some of my back catalogue, please go and find 7 Deaths, because Martin Lister turned it from some kind of weird punk nursery rhyme into a fantastic thing, which I'm really proud of. And unfortunately, he passed away soon after the album was released, which was I was very sad about that. Obviously, he was my best friend, but I feel like he's looking down on me now, saying, he phoned me once from Berlin when we were doing this. I'm so ashamed. And he said to me, Kim, it's Martin. I said, yeah, I know, mate. He said, have you got a guitar tuner? And I said, well, yeah. And he said, would you mind starting to use it? And I said, oh, okay. Because he couldn't get all my guitar playing was so out of tune, he couldn't get it lined up.
Oh my God, that sounds about like me when I'm trying to tune a guitar too. So yeah.
Have you got a guitar tuner? Could you start using it? Yeah, okay. There you go, mate.
I see you. Yeah, I can do it. Thumbs up.
Yeah. You keep turning my nonsense into massive pop hits, then we'll be there.
Right. But yeah, I just want to say, man, it's an honor to be able to talk to you about your career and
thank you. It's
and
an
things like
absolute
that.
pleasure.
You're very
Nothing
welcome.
I like more than talking about myself.
Well, anytime you want to come on just to talk or whatever, even if you have nothing going on, come back on, pop on. I'll send you an invite at 10 a.m. Since this is actually a lot better for you, since you live out in the UK on the weekends, we can probably do something. But man, I have to say this. I am enjoying your music. I have it downloaded on Spotify to listen to. You're doing a fantastic job doing what you're doing. I do, and I hope that you continue your success into this. But is there anything that you want to pitch or anything like that, or where people want to follow you?
I would say is you can get to my music through my website, which is kimhalliday.com, and there's a link on there to a page that says Play Me Everything, which is my whole back catalogue. And so you can go and listen to it there. You can't download it from there, but most of it is available on Bandcamp. Just search for Kim Halliday, and it's all pay what you like. I kind of like, I'm past the point in my life where 0.007 cents is going to make any difference to me. So please feel free to download it and get in contact. I love people getting in contact with me, and it's all kind of fun. Apart from that, thank you very much for putting up with me.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I'm not just putting up with you. I'm actually enjoying our conversation, and you add a lot more of aside to composing than I ever thought about even imagining. You definitely expanded my horizons when it comes down to editing and composing and adding music into into movies and stuff like that too. So thank you so much. It's been a privilege.
Thank you. It's been really good fun. I'll keep in touch. That my Stranger Things will be coming out soon. I'll let you know. We can check about that.
Hell yeah, definitely, man. Because I'm a huge Stranger Things fan. So let's do it. I'm down for it.
Good, brilliant.
Okay. And always until next time, guys, don't forget to smash that like button. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And always until next time. Bye-bye.